Good morning, guys. This is the last day of the plants unit, which means we have one unit left. The semester really flew by. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. If you're at home, just let me know if you're here in the chat. I noticed a number of people did already. Mohammed, would you mind hitting the far switch? The far one? Yeah. Just gonna take attendance quick, guys.
Mr. Dover, please call extension 5501. Mr. Dover, call 5501, please.
Good morning. You guys have a good weekend? Restful? So. Okay. Let's chat about what we're going to do today. Sorry, Mom, can you switch which lights are off? Thanks. Perfect. It's just easier to see the screen, I think, for you guys. Okay, last day of plants. So, this morning, on Friday, you guys were looking at flowers, which is probably the primary sexual reproductive mechanism for plants, at least for flowering plants, which makes up a huge percentage of plants. Today, in the first block, we're going to broaden that out a little bit, and instead of just focusing on flowering plants, we're going to talk about what are all of the potential sexual reproductive mechanisms of plants. So not all of them necessarily have flowers. We'll talk a little bit about gymnosperms and stuff like that as well, and what they do. There's a little bit of a summary video to start things off. It talks about like the main sexual reproductive strategies for plants. And so again, it does get into flowering again, which you guys already know the structures and how they work, but it also talks about the other potential reproductive mechanisms that are sexual, and a little bit about the asexual reproductive mechanisms, which are things like plants growing off of the roots of themselves and forming new members, or it talks a little bit about scions and the idea of cuttings and things like that, and how you can asexually propagate plants. So it gets into that. There is the note component. So you guys already have that note. It's the next page in the notes package, which is, so pull that up right here. So it would be page, where's this part? Right after the flower stuff, right here. So there is a little bit of stuff here on asexual reproduction in plants. That's chapter 13.2 in your text, and there's a little bit of stuff on sexual reproduction in plants. And again, there's multiple mechanisms for those, so it's not only by flower. So you read that, you read this part, a bit of reading today. And then any new vocabulary that you find as you're reading through the notes package, you can add that to your plants vocabulary list. I would assume you guys are probably somewhere around 30 words there already, aren't you? For people in general? You should be in that neighborhood. Don't forget to hand that in at the end of the day. Then you're going to answer the question at the bottom of page 1. So the bottom of page 1 is, oh, is it going to go from the beginning again? That's annoying. When it says page 1, it's actually, well, page 1 of today, which is page 16 in your notes package. But there's a question at the bottom here that asks you to use research from the internet to describe how grafting works. So grafting is a process that is very popular when we grow plants for domestic food production, because you, as the consumer, want your vegetables, or I should say, I guess the seller wants this as well, the farmer wants this as well, but they want extreme consistency, right? You want all of your apples to look the way you think an apple looks, and you want all your tomatoes to look the way like a tomato. Tomato is probably a bad example, but you want all your oranges to look the way an orange is supposed to look. And so you don't want any type of genetic differences between your oranges, right? You don't want like a slightly more orange or a slightly greener orange, or because that's what happens in nature. You're going to get all kinds of genetic minor differences between individuals, right? So grafting is a great way around that process, and you guys are going to look into that process in a little bit more detail. How does that work? But I'm having difficulty with words today. That process is essentially creating clones. It's cloning things. If you want everything to be exactly the same, cloning is probably the way to go. So, and there are some positives to doing that. Obviously, you get very consistent crops. And there are also some negatives to cloning, which in the end, you guys are going to look into that as well. So look into the process of grafting here. That's part of this question. And then there are 2 analysis questions from the textbook. Then you guys are going to read through the section on sexual reproduction in plants. This one will be a little bit more familiar because we already talked about flowers and how they function, but it talks about some other reproductive mechanisms, including what gymnosperms use. And oh yeah, and then there's a little question at the end that asks you to note in your notes what makes something a fruit. This part is actually in the video that you watch at the beginning. So pay special attention to that. I put a question on the quiz about this too. But like, what does make something a fruit? Why is something called a fruit in biology? And it talks about it in the video. Okay. So like I said, once you're done that, there are those 2 questions from the textbook. There's a short exit quiz. It's 5 marks, I think. In the second block, and this is sort of just like a wrap up to the plants unit. We're talking about reproduction. That's the last thing we're going to discuss in plants unit. And then you guys can start your project early if you finish early in the first block. That was kind of the idea, so you'd have more time to work on the project. So the project is very similar to the one from the last unit in that you guys are going to be preparing a short presentation. The last presentation was about a medical technology. In this unit, you guys are going to be preparing a presentation on an important plant. What plant? It's up to you. Okay, you guys you can pick pretty much any plant. If you did a plant for your species spotlight assignment right at the very beginning in unit 1, don't pick the same plant. Okay, that's the only thing I ask of you, is that if you know a plant really well already because you did it for that assignment, don't pick that plant. Pick something new so you can learn about it, something new. And let me go through the requirements here. It's gonna let me do this. Okay, how do I click on this stuff? Assignments. Preview. Ah, there we go. Okay, so it's down here at the bottom. Let me go through the requirements. So, I mean, basically the requirements for this assignment are exactly the same as they are for the medical technology presentation. You need to have a research sheet showing where you're getting all your data from with APA citations, and that you're gonna prepare a slideshow about your plant that you've selected, and then with the following things included in your slideshow. I'm doing this intentionally to keep everything a little bit more consistent, so that this is for your convenience here to keep everything familiar. So I'm not constantly changing the requirements or the expectations on these, because the turnaround is so fast. Because I know some people literally just handed in their medical technology presentation. So I don't want to change stuff too much here. Try and keep it consistent so we can so there's not any confusion. So again, it can be about the same length long here, about 5 to 7 minutes. Most of yours will probably be around 5 minutes, and that's totally fine. Okay, slightly less than 5. Also fine, as long as you're discussing this information in some detail. Okay, so the idea here is that you're going to show me or demonstrate your knowledge of plant structures and function of those structures through this presentation. Okay, so that's one component that I'm going to be assessing. And the other part that I'm going to assess is you demonstrating your understanding through research of the significance of your plant. So the idea here is that you're going to pick a plant that is culturally or technologically significant, okay? And may be significant in more than one of those ways. So I listed some ways in which plants could potentially be significant. So maybe they are used in a religious or cultural context. Maybe they're a building material or used for building materials, a source of food, a pharmaceutical, an ingredient in Aboriginal medicine, a flood or erosion control mechanism, or they're used for recreation or ecotourism. Okay, that's pretty broad, right? Like any type of cultural importance of a plant. So ideally, you would choose a plant that is important in more than one of those contexts, more than one of those modalities. I don't think that's too hard to find something that has multiple potential uses. But the idea here is that we're going to examine the use of a specific plant to humanity. We've been talking about all this stuff sort of just as in general. This is what a stem is for and what it looks like, and this is what a root is. But this is, here we're specifically looking at the importance to humans, okay, the cultural and technological significance of a plant. So, and again, you guys can pick really whatever you want, okay? I'll leave it totally up to you. Are you interested in a particular plant because it is used in floral arrangements? Cool, okay, this is pretty broad. Are you interested in it because it is an important produces something that smells really nice and you like to have that scent in your house or whatever? Okay, that's fine too. Okay, that's like a cultural significance. So I'll leave it wide open. You pick something that you're interested in here that has a potential significance. And then I've got some general guidelines here for how you want to lay your slideshow out. So the title slide is as normal here, is just your name and your course code and what plant you've picked. Okay, pictures would be nice. Try to keep these a little bit interesting to watch. By the way, the medical technology presentations that I've already watched, many of them have been excellent. And I learned a bunch of stuff in them, so that's really cool. By the way, I normally look that stuff up if I'm unsure, but I will say that they were fascinating. So a lot of people did really good presentations for that. Anyway, you're going to describe your plant. So what's the scientific name and the common name for your plant? Tell me about it. Like, what is it called? What type of plant is it? Bryophyte, pteridophyte, gymnosperm, monocot, dicot? Okay, it's got to be one of those. So those are all the potential phylums for plants. So it's got to be one of those. Show me a diagram of your plant. Okay, this time you don't need to draw it like you did for your you were supposed to draw it for your species spotlight assignment. You don't need to draw it, but describe some unique structural features of your plant. Like how do you know you're looking at a Scots pine, or I don't know, whatever you pick, okay? Like, what are the unique structural features? This is an opportunity when you're talking about structural features for you to use some of the terminology and knowledge that you have about structures and functions of plants, okay? Talk a little bit about the features of the stem. Talk about the features of the leaves, okay? The idea being here is that you're applying some of your knowledge from the unit to this, okay? That's the idea. So, put some detail in here. Think about it. Discuss the life cycle of your plant. Today, you guys are going to be looking at sort of like the basic life cycle of plants. There are 2 chapters referenced. I think it's 13.2 and 13.3. Consider reading those. It gives you a lot more detail on the asexual plants that use asexual reproduction, what their life cycle looks like, and plants that use sexual reproduction, what their life cycle looks like. We already talked about the idea of alternation of generations, switching between the sporophyte and the gametophyte generation of plants. You know, like, discuss that. How does your particular plant do that? Okay. Is there another species involved in your plant's reproduction? You know, if it's a flowering plant, it almost certainly has another species that it uses for pollination. Talk about that. Or, you know, anything within the context of reproduction of your plant. Describe it in detail and discuss, okay? And then the last part here, so by the way, the plant's description and the life cycle, again, those are opportunities for you to demonstrate your understanding of knowledge from the unit. Tell me about its reproductive structures and how they work. You know, like this is where you're showing me your understanding of structure and function of plants, okay? The second component here, the significance component, is where you're showing me your research that you've done with regards to the cultural and technological significance of your plant, okay? So why is it significant? What are all the different modalities in which your plant is significant to humans? Tell me about how it's used. For each of those potential use modalities, like if it's important for construction materials, it's important for erosion control, whatever, try and discuss, bring some anatomy into there and tell me about what part of the plant is being used for that modality. Is it the stem that's used for construction? Is it the leaf that's used for construction? Like, tell me more about it. Is there anything significant about those structures in your particular plant that makes it useful? So for example, the ground tissue in bamboo stems, it has a very high silica content. And that makes it resistant to termites. So termites do not like to eat bamboo. That is one of the reasons why it is significant as a building material. It also has a very high strength to weight ratio. And again, you could discuss that too if you pick bamboo. So, but try and connect the physiological, the structures that we've discussed, okay, with what the function is for it in your technological or cultural context, okay? If it produces some important enzyme for medicine or whatever, where is it being produced in the plant? Is that an enzyme found in the flower? Is it something found in the stem or the root of the plant? Tell me about that. Tell me with regards to the tissues of the root or whatever, okay? Again, you're trying to connect these things together. And then tell me a little bit about the history of the significance of the plant. Is this a relatively recent phenomenon? Is the use of the plant really changed over time? If you're talking about a building material, did it used to be a very important building material, but now it's less important? Is it more important now? Is this something that is specifically important in Canada? Is it important in an international context? You know, discuss that, its cultural and historical significance in terms of how it's changed over time. Okay, that's the second component of it, the significance. You'll notice that I've kept these points fairly general, and then you guys are going to fill in the blanks here. Okay, so like keep your research broad and like discuss various aspects. I'm not asking for specific things because I've left the project so wide open in terms of what you could potentially talk about, right? You could be talking about a medicine, or you could be talking about a building material or whatever. So I can't make it too specific here. So just in general, you're going to discuss its cultural and technological importance. Okay, and then your last slide is going to include your works cited. The actual requirements for the assignment, which is that you're going to be handing in a link to a video file, or potentially a video file, but the link to a video file works better. So I'm not downloading your videos all day, although I can if necessary. And a research document that's showing in point form what you've learned from your various sources and APA citations for each. Okay? Any questions about the assignment before I move on? Fairly straightforward? Okay. This one's pretty much straight out of the curriculum book, so. All right. The last thing I want to mention is that the quiz is also happening today in Learning Block 3. Pull that up. That's the Anatomy, Growth, and Function Plants unit quiz. Okay, it'll show up right at 12:50. It does have a time limit of 70 minutes, okay, which is an hour and 10 minutes. And it is 30 questions. Mostly multiple choice, 25 are multiple choice, 1 is true and false, and 4 are check all that apply, if I remember correctly. Okay, that's 30 questions in 70 minutes. That gives you about 2 minutes and 10-ish seconds, two and a bit minutes per question. So realistically, most of those multiple choice questions, or a lot of them, you will just say, yep, right? It'll take you a second or 2 seconds, which leaves you for some of the more difficult questions, 5-ish minutes for you to answer, which should give you an opportunity if you need to look stuff up in your notes. The idea is, again, this is open book, right? I didn't want to leave it super wide open and just say take 3 hours for 30 questions, because then what's going to happen is people are going to turn every question into a research project, which I don't want. I am trying to assess whether or not you know any of these things, not let me try and learn the entire unit in 3 hours. Okay, so that's not really the point here. So I did put a time limit on it, but it is a fairly relaxed time limit. Okay, it is 70 minutes. So you don't have to rush through it or anything. Any questions about that? That's during learning block 3. Okay, I'll give you an opportunity here to work on these things. I think the stuff for block 1 is considerably shorter than 2 hours. So you probably can take a significant portion of learning block 1 and work on your project, but just feel free to move on whenever you're ready, okay? If you guys have any questions at home or anything, don't be afraid to send me a message, okay? We'll get that stuff figured out. By the way, you can pick any plant you want, so there's no restrictions whatsoever on that. Anything you're interested in. All right. Okay, cool. So just one quick thing I wanted to mention to everybody at home. I put this in the chat, but I'm not sure if everybody read it. You don't necessarily have to select one specific species for the project. You can pick a genus, so like a group of species, that and talk about their cultural or technological significance. So it doesn't have to be one specific species, but you could talk about all of the species in the genus Pinus, for example, which would be all the different types of pine. That I think that'll broaden it up a little bit more and make it a little bit easier to talk about plants' cultural relevance, because often it's an entire group that's being used the same, an entire genus. If you have any questions while you're working on the project, don't be afraid to let me know.